Carl Jung discovered something that will completely shatter your understanding of what it means to pass the final test as an empath. If you've spent your life feeling everything, absorbing emotions you couldn't name, loving people who couldn't love you back, and you've finally reached a point where something inside you has fundamentally shifted, Jung would tell you that you're not healing from empathy. You're graduating into what he called sovereign consciousness, a psychological state so rare that less than 3% of empaths ever achieve it in their lifetime. This isn't about becoming less sensitive. This isn't about building walls or protecting yourself or learning to care less. This is about a specific transformation that happens when an empath stops trying to save the world and finally learns to witness it without being destroyed by what they see. Most people think the empath's journey is about learning boundaries, about saying no, about protecting their energy. But Jung spent decades studying individuals who embodied what he termed the wounded healer archetype, and what he found was revolutionary. The final test for an empath has nothing to do with learning to feel less. It has everything to do with learning to hold more while remaining whole. You've probably noticed something changing in you recently. Maybe you're no longer devastated by other people's pain the way you used to be. Maybe you can sit with someone's suffering without immediately trying to fix it. Maybe you've started to recognize when someone's drama is a choice rather than a crisis, and you no longer feel responsible for changing their mind. Jung would tell you these aren't signs that you're becoming cold or disconnected. These are signs that you're finally understanding the difference between compassion and codependency, between empathy and enmeshment, between holding space and holding responsibility. The final test that every empath must pass is learning to love the world without trying to rescue it, to feel everything without being consumed by what you feel, to recognize suffering without believing you're meant to eliminate it. This transformation doesn't happen through effort or discipline. It happens through a breaking open so profound that your entire relationship with your empathic nature fundamentally reorganizes itself. Think about the moments that brought you to this threshold, the relationships where you poured yourself out until there was nothing left, the people you tried to heal who only took more, the times you absorbed someone's pain thinking it would lighten their load, only to discover they handed you their burden and walked away free while you carried weight that was never yours. Jung documented case after case of empaths who reached what he called the saturation point, the moment when your empathic system simply cannot hold one more ounce of energy that doesn't belong to you. This saturation creates a crisis that most people interpret as burnout or depression or spiritual emergency, but Jung recognized it as initiation. The final test begins in this crisis. Your old way of being empathic, where you merged with others' emotions and lost yourself in their needs, stops working. Not because you failed, but because your soul has outgrown that level of consciousness. You're being called into something Jung termed integrated empathy, where you maintain your gift of deep feeling while developing the psychological structure to remain separate from what you feel. Most empaths resist this transformation because it feels like betrayal. You've built your entire identity around being the one who understands, who cares, who sacrifices for others' well-being. The idea of stepping back, of not saving everyone, feels like becoming someone you don't recognize. But Jung discovered that empaths who have the courage to pass through this final test emerge with gifts that exceed anything they possessed before. You don't lose your sensitivity. You gain sovereignty over it. You don't stop caring. You start caring wisely. You don't close your heart. You learn to keep it open without letting everyone walk through it carrying their chaos. The transformation feels like death, because in a very real sense, it is death. The version of you who believed your worth came from how much you could hold for others must die, so the version who knows her worth is inherent can be born. Have you felt this shift beginning in yourself? Have you noticed moments where you chose your own peace over someone else's crisis, and instead of guilt, you felt something close to relief? Share in the comments if you recognize yourself standing at this threshold, because Jung believed that naming where you are in your journey is the first step toward consciously choosing what comes next. Jung made a discovery about empaths that explains why this final test feels so disorienting, so lonely, so unlike anything you've experienced before. He found that most empaths develop their sensitivity as a survival mechanism in childhood, learning to read emotional environments with precision because their safety depended on it. You became hypervigilant to shifts in energy because you needed to predict when the adults around you would explode, withdraw, or demand emotional labor you were too young to provide. Your empathic abilities weren't a spiritual gift you were born with. They were a psychological adaptation you developed to survive an environment that required you to manage emotions that weren't yours. This realization changes everything about how you understand your empathic nature. What you've been calling your gift, what you've believed made you special or different or somehow chosen for a higher purpose, was actually a wound response that helped you navigate an unsafe childhood. Jung called this the sacred wound. Not because the wound itself is sacred, but because the consciousness you can develop through healing it becomes sacred. The final test requires you to separate your essential self from the survival mechanisms you developed, to discover who you are when you're not performing emotional labor for others' comfort. Think about what happens when you stop reflexively taking care of everyone around you. There's a moment of profound emptiness, almost like vertigo, because you've been so focused on others' needs that you have no idea what your own needs even are. Jung observed that empaths passing through the final test often experience what he called identity dissolution, where every role you've played, every way you've defined yourself through your capacity to hold space for others, temporarily collapses. You're left with a terrifying question. If I'm not the healer, the listener, the one who understands, who am I? Most empaths panic at this stage and immediately rush back into caretaking roles because the discomfort of not knowing yourself feels unbearable. But Jung insisted this emptiness is exactly where the transformation happens. In the space between who you were and who you're becoming, you have the opportunity to meet yourself without the distortion of other people's needs shaping your identity. You get to discover what you actually want, what you genuinely feel, what matters to you when you're not trying to matter to everyone else. The final test asks you to sit in this uncomfortable unknown and resist the urge to fill it with more people to save, more causes to serve, more situations where you can prove your worth through how much you can endure. Jung called this the sacred pause, and he found that empaths who can tolerate this pause without rushing into new patterns of self-abandonment emerge with something most people never develop, a relationship with themselves that's more real, more nourishing, more stable than any external relationship they've ever had. There's another layer to this test that Jung identified, something he rarely discussed publicly because it challenged cultural narratives about empathy being inherently virtuous. He discovered that many empaths use their sensitivity as a way to avoid their own emotional work. By focusing constantly on others' pain, you never have to feel your own. By trying to heal everyone around you, you never have to confront what's broken inside yourself. Your empathy becomes a sophisticated defense mechanism, a way to maintain the identity of being good, helpful, selfless, while secretly using other people's problems as a distraction from your own unresolved trauma. The final test forces you to stop using your empathic nature as an escape from yourself. It demands that you turn all that attention, all that care, all that deep feeling inward, and finally witness your own heart with the same tenderness you've given everyone else. This confrontation with your own neglected inner world is what makes the test so brutal. You discover how long you've been running from yourself while appearing to run toward others. You see how much easier it's been to fix everyone else's life than to face what's unhealed in your own. If what I'm sharing resonates with a place in you that you haven't spoken about yet, a place that knows you've been avoiding yourself by saving everyone else, I want you to know there's deep compassion here for that pattern. And if you're feeling called to go deeper into this work of reclaiming yourself, of understanding the psychological patterns that shaped your empathic nature, and learning how to transform them, I've created something that might support you. It's waiting in the first pinned comment, a guide that walks with you through this exact process of becoming sovereign in your sensitivity. Carl Jung identified something that will fundamentally change how you see every relationship you've ever had. He discovered that empaths who pass the final test undergo what he called perception transformation, where you suddenly start seeing people's behavior not as something you need to fix or understand or tolerate, but as information about their level of consciousness and their capacity for authentic relationship. This shift is subtle but revolutionary. Before this transformation, when someone showed you who they were through their actions, you'd immediately create stories about why they behaved that way, what pain must be driving them, how you could help them heal. But after passing the final test, when someone shows you who they are, you simply believe them. This might sound simple, but for an empath who's spent their entire life seeing everyone's potential rather than their reality, this is a seismic shift. You stop making excuses for people who hurt you. You stop waiting for them to become the version of themselves you can sense they're capable of being. You stop offering your energy, your time, your emotional labor to people who haven't demonstrated they value what you bring. Jung found that this shift creates what he called conscious discernment, the ability to recognize who deserves access to your depths and who should remain at the periphery of your life. The old version of you believed that everyone deserved your empathy, your understanding, your patience. The sovereign version that emerges after the final test understands that empathy without discernment is self-betrayal. Not everyone has earned the right to your emotional availability. Not everyone is capable of meeting you at the depths where you live. And continuing to offer your gifts to people who can't receive them isn't compassion. It's a pattern of self-abandonment dressed up as virtue. Jung observed that empaths struggle with this discernment because you've been conditioned to believe that having boundaries means you're not really empathic, that truly evolved people love everyone equally. That spiritual maturity requires you to give endlessly without regard for reciprocity. But he insisted that this conditioning keeps empaths trapped in cycles of depletion that serve no one. The highest expression of empathy, Jung discovered, is empathy that includes yourself. Compassion that extends to everyone except you isn't compassion, it's compulsion. The final test teaches you to recognize energy vampires not with judgment but with clarity. These are people who take consistently more than they give, who come to you only when they need something, who drain your energy, and then disappear until the next crisis. Before your transformation, you probably felt obligated to be available for these people, believing that setting boundaries with someone in pain was cruel. But Jung would tell you that allowing someone to consistently use you as an emotional dumping ground while offering nothing in return is cruel to yourself. And teaching people they can treat you this way is actually preventing their growth, not supporting it. There's a particular type of person that empaths encounter repeatedly, someone Jung called the perpetual victim. This is someone who's always in crisis, always suffering, always needing rescue, but who never actually changes their circumstances or does the inner work to heal. They collect helpers, exhaust them, then move on to the next person willing to carry their emotional weight. You've probably known several of these individuals, and if you're honest, you've probably been devastated each time they moved on to someone else after you'd poured everything into trying to help them. The final test teaches you to recognize that you weren't helping these people. You were enabling them to avoid their own transformation by doing their emotional work for them. Jung found that empaths often confuse rescue with love, believing that if you truly care about someone, you'll do anything to ease their suffering. But he discovered that real love sometimes means allowing people to face consequences, to feel their own pain, to develop the psychological muscles that only grow through struggle. By constantly cushioning others from discomfort, you're actually preventing them from developing the resilience they need to genuinely heal. This realization can bring up intense guilt for empaths. You might be recognizing patterns where you've been complicit in keeping people stuck by being too available, too understanding, too willing to absorb their pain. But Jung would want you to know that recognizing this pattern isn't about blaming yourself for having a good heart. It's about understanding that your heart's goodness has been misdirected by conditioning that taught you your worth comes from how much you can tolerate, how much you can give, how much you can endure without asking for anything in return. The transformation that happens when you pass this test is that you start choosing differently. You start recognizing when someone is asking for help versus when they're asking you to do their work for them. You start seeing the difference between supporting someone's growth and becoming complicit in their stagnation. You start understanding that the most loving thing you can do for someone might be saying no, stepping back, allowing them to figure it out themselves. This discernment doesn't make you less empathic. It makes you empathic in service to truth rather than in service to others' comfort. Jung made a profound observation about what happens to an empath's relationships after they pass the final test. He discovered that many connections that felt essential before the transformation suddenly become intolerable afterward. This isn't because you've changed in ways that make you difficult or demanding. It's because you've changed in ways that make you unavailable for dynamics, based on you giving everything while receiving nothing. The people who benefited from your old patterns of self-abandonment don't recognize this new version of you, and many of them will try to guilt you back into the role you used to play. This creates what Jung called the great sorting, where your relationships reorganize themselves based on whether they were founded on genuine connection or on your willingness to be used. The friends who only called when they needed something drift away when you stop being available for one-sided conversations. The family members who expected you to absorb their dysfunction without complaint become angry when you start having boundaries. The partners who relied on you managing their emotions suddenly feel you've become distant or changed in ways they don't like. Jung observed that this sorting is often the most painful part of the transformation, because you're confronted with the reality that many relationships you believed were based on love were actually based on function. People loved what you did for them, not who you were. They loved your availability, your understanding, your willingness to sacrifice your needs for theirs. And when you stop functioning in ways that serve them, they don't know how to relate to you anymore. The loss of these relationships can feel devastating, but Jung insisted this loss is actually liberation. Think about the relief hidden underneath the grief. The exhaustion of maintaining relationships where you're always the giver, always the one doing emotional labor, always the one adjusting to make others comfortable. The final test strips away connections that were costing you more than they were nourishing you, creating space for relationships based on reciprocity, respect, mutual growth. But first, you have to be willing to sit in the emptiness of that space and resist the urge to fill it with more people who need you, rather than people who see you. Jung identified something he called the sovereignty gap, the period between releasing relationships based on your old patterns and attracting relationships that match your new consciousness. This gap feels terrifying for empaths because you're used to being surrounded by people who need you, and suddenly you're alone more than you've ever been. Your phone stops ringing as often. Your schedule isn't packed with other people's emergencies. You have long stretches of time with nothing to do except be with yourself. And for someone who's spent their life running from themselves by taking care of others, this can feel like exile. But Jung discovered that empaths who can tolerate this sovereignty gap without panicking back into old patterns emerge with something extraordinary: the ability to be alone without being lonely, to enjoy their own company, to find fulfillment in their own presence. You learn that you don't need constant connection to feel worthy. You discover that your value doesn't diminish when no one is actively needing you. You understand that the peace of having nothing to prove and no one to save is actually what you've been seeking all along, even though you've been searching for it in all the wrong places. The final test also transforms how you show up in the relationships that do survive this sorting. Jung found that empaths who complete this transformation become capable of what he called boundaried intimacy, where you can be deeply connected to someone while maintaining clear separation between their experience and yours. You can listen to someone's pain without absorbing it. You can offer support without taking responsibility for their healing. You can care deeply while recognizing that their journey is theirs to walk, not yours to walk for them. This type of relating feels foreign at first because it requires you to hold paradox, being close while remaining separate, being loving while maintaining boundaries, being available while also being unavailable for dynamics that deplete you. Most empaths have operated in extremes, either merging completely with others or withdrawing entirely to protect themselves. The middle path of boundaried intimacy is something you have to learn through practice, through noticing when you're slipping into old patterns of taking on too much, through consciously pulling your energy back to yourself when you feel it flowing towards someone in ways that abandon you. If you're in this sorting phase right now, if you're watching relationships fall away and wondering if you're becoming someone cold or selfish, I want you to know that what's happening is necessary. You're not losing people. You're releasing patterns. And the emptiness you're feeling is actually spaciousness. Space for relationships that honor who you're becoming rather than who you used to be. Share in the comments if you're experiencing this great sorting. If you're recognizing which connections were based on genuine love and which were based on your willingness to be used. Sometimes naming what's happening helps you trust the process instead of fighting against it. Carl Jung discovered something that explains why passing the final test as an empath feels so much like losing yourself before you find yourself. He identified what he called the dismantling phase, where every identity you've built around being empathic, every way you've defined your worth through your sensitivity systematically falls apart. This isn't a failure of your healing process. This is the healing process. You can't transform your relationship with empathy while clinging to identities built on wounded versions of it. The old self has to dissolve before the integrated self can emerge. During this dismantling, you might notice that situations that would have once sent you into immediate caretaking mode now leave you strangely unmoved. Someone shares their drama, and instead of the familiar surge of responsibility to fix it, you feel nothing. Or worse, you feel something that looks like indifference, and it terrifies you because you've always defined yourself as someone who cares deeply about everything. Jung would tell you this isn't indifference. This is discernment, finally overriding compulsion. Your empathic system is learning to distinguish between situations that genuinely call for your presence and situations that are simply familiar patterns of someone trying to hand you their emotional burden. The dismantling also affects how you perceive your own emotions. Before the transformation, you probably experienced your feelings as overwhelming, oceanic, impossible to contain. You'd be flooded by waves of emotion that seemed to come from nowhere, and you'd spend enormous energy trying to process or understand or control these feelings. But Jung observed that much of what empaths experience as their own emotions are actually absorbed energies from others that you've unconsciously taken on as your own. You've been carrying a collective emotional weight, mistaking it for personal feeling. As you pass through the final test, you start developing what Jung called energetic literacy, the ability to distinguish between emotions that originate within you and emotions you've absorbed from your environment. This is a subtle but transformative skill. You begin noticing that certain feelings lift when you leave certain spaces or end contact with certain people. You start recognizing that some of your anxiety isn't yours, some of your sadness belongs to someone else. Some of your anger is reflecting collective frustration you've unconsciously absorbed. This recognition allows you to release energy that was never yours to carry, creating a lightness you probably haven't felt since childhood. But here's where Jung's insight becomes crucial. Learning to distinguish your emotions from absorbed energies doesn't mean you stop feeling deeply. It means you start feeling clearly. Your empathic nature becomes refined rather than overwhelming. You can sense others' emotional states without taking them on. You can recognize suffering without believing you're responsible for eliminating it. You can hold space for someone's experience without losing yourself in their experience. This is the difference between unconscious empathy, where you merge with everything you encounter, and conscious empathy, where you maintain sovereignty while remaining open. Jung found that this refinement requires what he called the practice of return, where you consciously bring your attention back to your own body, your own breath, your own center, repeatedly throughout each day. Empaths typically have their attention scattered across dozens of people and situations, monitoring everyone's emotional temperature, tracking multiple people's needs, unconsciously maintaining awareness of all the suffering around them. This constant outward focus depletes you and keeps you disconnected from your own inner world. The practice of return is deceptively simple. Notice when your attention is on others, and gently bring it back to yourself. This practice feels wrong at first because you've been conditioned to believe that focusing on yourself is selfish, that paying attention to your own needs means you're not available for others. But Jung insisted that empaths cannot function sustainably without this continual returning to center. Every time you bring your attention back to yourself, you're reinforcing the boundary between your experience and others' experiences. You're teaching your nervous system that it's safe to remain in your own body, rather than energetically merging with everyone around you. The dismantling phase also requires you to grieve who you were before you understood what your empathy was costing you. There's a kind of innocence that gets lost when you recognize how much of your identity was built on patterns that harmed you. You can't go back to unconsciously absorbing everyone's pain and believing it made you virtuous. You can't return to exhausting yourself for people who took your care for granted. You can't unknow that much of what you called love was actually self-abandonment. This grief is necessary and sacred, and Jung believed that empaths who try to skip this grief by immediately focusing on their new identity never fully integrate the transformation. Sit with the loss of who you were. Honor the version of you who gave everything because she didn't know any other way to prove her worth. Thank her for keeping you safe in the only way she knew how, and then, gently, consciously, release her. She served her purpose. But she's not who you're becoming. The you that's emerging doesn't need to prove anything. She knows her worth is inherent, not earned through depletion. Jung made a revolutionary discovery about what empaths gain when they pass the final test that will completely transform how you understand your purpose. He found that empaths who complete this transformation develop what he called sacred witnessing, a capacity to be fully present with life's suffering without needing to fix it, change it, or take it away. This is perhaps the most profound shift in consciousness that an empath can experience, moving from the compulsion to rescue to the grace of simply being with what is. Think about how your empathy has functioned until now. Someone shares their pain, and immediately you're scanning for solutions, offering advice, trying to help them see things differently, or you're taking on their emotional state, feeling their feelings as if they were your own, believing that carrying their burden will lighten their load. Jung observed that this type of empathy, while well-intentioned, actually prevents genuine healing because it doesn't allow people to fully feel their own experience. You're so busy trying to rescue them that they never have to face what they're feeling, and without fully facing it, they can't genuinely move through it. Sacred witnessing requires something much more difficult than rescue. It requires you to be present with someone's pain without trying to eliminate it, to hold space for their struggle, without needing them to feel better so you can feel better. This is possible only when you've done enough of your own inner work that you're not destabilized by others' suffering, when you've developed such a strong center that you can remain grounded even when someone next to you is falling apart. The final test builds this capacity by forcing you to sit with your own pain without anyone rescuing you, teaching you through direct experience that you can survive discomfort without someone rushing in to fix it. Jung called this the transmission of presence, where your ability to remain calm and centered in the face of chaos becomes healing in itself, not because you're doing anything to fix the situation, but because you're modeling what it looks like to not be destroyed by difficulty. People in your life start to feel safer bringing their authentic struggles to you because they sense you won't try to take their experience away from them, won't try to silver lining their grief, won't rush them through their process to get to a more comfortable place. You become someone who can sit in the fire with them without needing the fire to stop burning. This shift also transforms your relationship with your own suffering. Before the final test, you probably tried to heal quickly, to process efficiently, to get through difficult emotions as fast as possible. But after the transformation, you understand that some pain isn't meant to be rushed through. Some grief needs to be fully felt. Some losses require you to sit in the darkness until your eyes adjust, and you can see what it came to teach you. Jung found that empaths who develop this patience with their own process become capable of holding much more complex emotional realities for themselves and others. The practical application of this in your daily life is profound. You stop taking responsibility for other people's emotional states. When someone in your life is upset, you no longer believe it's your job to make them feel better. When someone is struggling, you offer presence rather than solutions. When someone is in pain, you sit with them in their pain rather than trying to drag them out of it before they're ready. This doesn't mean you become passive or uncaring. It means you become wise enough to know the difference between supporting someone's journey and trying to walk it for them. Jung also discovered that empaths who pass the final test develop what he called compassionate detachment, a state that seems paradoxical, but is actually the highest expression of empathy. You care deeply about others' well-being while remaining unattached to specific outcomes for their lives. You can want the best for someone while accepting that their version of best might look different from yours. You can recognize someone's potential while respecting their timeline for actualizing it, even if that timeline is never. This detachment isn't coldness. It's the recognition that everyone has their own path, their own lessons, their own soul's curriculum, and your job isn't to control their journey but to honor it. This level of consciousness is rare and precious. Most people never develop the capacity to care without controlling, to love without possessing, to support without directing. Empaths who achieve this become what Jung called holding environments for others' transformation. Spaces where people can explore their authentic selves without fear of judgment or unwanted intervention. You're not trying to make anyone into something they're not. You're simply seeing who they already are and reflecting that recognition back to them. And if you're sensing that you're being called into this level of consciousness but aren't sure how to navigate the internal work it requires, if you're ready to transform your empathy from something that depletes you into something that sustains you, I want to gently remind you about the guide I mentioned. It's designed specifically for empaths moving through this exact transformation, offering practical frameworks based on Jung's work for developing sovereign sensitivity. You'll find it in the first pinned comment whenever you're ready to explore it. Share in the comments if you're beginning to recognize the difference between rescuing and witnessing, if you're feeling the shift from compulsive helping to sacred presence. Your recognition of this shift helps others identify it in their own journey. Carl Jung identified something that will explain why your life might feel so different now, why certain people and situations that once consumed your energy barely register anymore. He discovered that empaths who pass the final test undergo what he called frequency elevation, where your consciousness literally shifts to operate at a different energetic level. This isn't spiritual bypassing or pretending you're above certain concerns. This is a genuine transformation in what you're capable of perceiving and how you respond to what you perceive. Before this shift, you probably felt pulled into every emotional drama around you, unable to maintain your center when chaos erupted in your environment. Your empathy made you porous and you absorbed whatever energy was dominant in any space you entered. If you walked into a room where people were anxious, you became anxious. If someone near you was angry, you felt that anger in your own body. You were like an emotional sponge, soaking up everything around you without any filter or protection. Jung observed that this level of empathy, while incredibly sensitive, lacks the discernment that allows you to function sustainably in the world. The frequency elevation that comes after the final test creates what Jung termed selective resonance, where you still feel deeply but only resonate with energies that match your current level of consciousness. You can be in a room full of people operating from fear, drama, or victimhood, and instead of automatically absorbing those states, you simply observe them. They don't pull you in anymore because you're no longer vibrating at that frequency. This doesn't mean you judge people for where they are. It means you've developed enough internal coherence that you're not destabilized by others' lack of coherence. Think about what this means practically. You can have conversations with people who are deeply entrenched in victim consciousness without feeling responsible for fixing their perspective. You can witness someone's self-destructive patterns without feeling the urgent need to save them from themselves. You can be around negativity without becoming negative, around chaos without becoming chaotic, around pain without making that pain your own. This is the sovereignty that empaths are meant to develop, the ability to remain yourself regardless of what energy surrounds you. Jung found that this frequency elevation naturally attracts different people and circumstances into your life. Because you're no longer available for dynamics based on rescue and victimhood, people operating from those patterns start to fade from your experience. Meanwhile, you begin attracting individuals who are also doing their inner work, who take responsibility for their own healing, who meet you as equals rather than as saviors. Your relationships become characterized by mutual growth rather than one-sided caretaking. Your friendships are based on genuine connection rather than need. Your romantic partnerships, when they appear, are founded on two whole people choosing to build something together, rather than two wounded people trying to complete each other. This shift can feel lonely at first, because you're operating at a frequency that fewer people have access to. You might find yourself with a smaller circle, fewer social obligations, more time alone. But Jung insisted this loneliness is temporary and necessary. You're in a transitional phase where you've outgrown old connections, but haven't yet fully anchored into the new relationships that match your transformed consciousness. The key is to not panic back into old patterns out of fear of being alone, to not compromise your newfound sovereignty by accepting relationships that require you to dim your light or return to previous versions of yourself. Jung also observed that empaths at this stage often experience what he called purpose clarity, where you suddenly understand what you're actually meant to do with your empathic gifts. Before the transformation, you probably felt pulled in 1,000 directions wanting to help everyone, overwhelmed by all the suffering you could perceive. But after passing the final test, you develop clear discernment about where your energy actually belongs, what work is yours to do, which causes genuinely call to your soul versus which ones you are pursuing out of guilt or conditioning. This clarity often comes with surprising specificity. You might realize you're not meant to heal the entire world, just your particular corner of it. You might discover that your gift isn't in working directly with people at all, but in creating art, writing, research, or some other form of contribution that allows you to process and transmute collective energies without direct personal engagement. Jung found that many empaths mistakenly believe they must work in healing professions when their actual calling might be something entirely different, something that utilizes their sensitivity in ways that feel sustainable and enlivening rather than depleting. The freedom that comes with this clarity is immense. You stop saying yes to everything that tugs at your empathic heartstrings. You stop believing that every suffering person is your responsibility. You start recognizing that you have a specific gift, a particular purpose, a unique contribution, and honoring that purpose sometimes means saying no to opportunities that would have once felt obligatory. This selectivity isn't selfishness. It's stewardship of your gifts, ensuring you're directing your energy toward what actually aligns with your soul's work, rather than scattering yourself across every cause that produces guilt when you don't engage. Carl Jung spent the final years of his life reflecting on what he called the empath's sacred completion, the state of consciousness that emerges when an empath has fully integrated their sensitivity with their sovereignty. What he described was nothing short of remarkable. Empaths who complete this integration become what he termed transparent conduits for healing energy, able to facilitate transformation in others without taking on the weight of that transformation themselves. You don't lose your capacity to feel deeply or see clearly. You gain the wisdom to use those capacities in service to life rather than in service to your own wounding. This final stage is characterized by what Jung called effortless presence, where you no longer have to work so hard at maintaining boundaries or protecting your energy. Your system has reorganized itself at such a fundamental level that you naturally maintain your center while remaining open to connection. You've internalized the lessons the final test came to teach you, and now they operate automatically beneath conscious awareness. You don't have to remind yourself not to take on others' emotions, because your system has learned to distinguish yours from theirs. You don't have to force yourself to say no because your body now sends clear signals when something isn't aligned with your well-being. Jung observed that empaths at this stage often experience a phenomenon he called the return of joy, where life stops feeling so heavy, so serious, so overwhelmingly saturated with suffering. You rediscover playfulness, lightness, the simple pleasure of being alive without the constant weight of everyone's pain pressing down on you. This doesn't mean you become oblivious to suffering. It means you've learned to hold suffering without being crushed by it, to acknowledge pain without believing you must eliminate it, to witness darkness while maintaining your own light. The relationships you create from this integrated place have a completely different quality than anything you experienced before your transformation. Jung called these sovereign connections, partnerships where both people maintain their wholeness while choosing to intertwine their lives. There's no merging, no enmeshment, no losing yourself in the other person. Instead, there's a dance of intimacy and autonomy, closeness and independence, union and individuation. You can be deeply connected to someone while remaining profoundly yourself. You can love someone completely while honoring your own boundaries absolutely. Think about what it means to enter relationship from this place of completion rather than from a place of seeking completion. You're not looking for someone to heal your wounds or validate your worth or make you whole. You're already whole. You're looking for someone who is also whole, someone who has done their own work, someone capable of meeting you in the depths without drowning in them. Jung found that empaths who reach this level of integration often attract partners who are also evolved in their consciousness, creating relationships characterized by mutual respect, authentic communication, and genuine growth rather than codependent patterns masquerading as intimacy. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of passing the final test is what Jung called the gift of return, where everything you learned through your struggles, every way you've grown through your pain, every capacity you developed through your breaking open, now becomes available to offer others who are walking similar paths. You become a guide not through preaching or teaching, but simply through embodying what's possible. Your presence demonstrates that empaths can be deeply feeling without being destroyed, profoundly open without being depleted, extraordinarily sensitive without being fragile. People are drawn to you now for different reasons than before. They're not seeking rescue or validation or someone to carry their burdens. They're seeking recognition, inspiration, permission to believe they too can transform their sensitivity from curse into gift. You don't need to do anything special to provide this. Your existence as a sovereign empath is the teaching. Your ability to maintain peace in chaos, boundaries in intimacy, clarity in complexity, these become living lessons for others who are ready to learn them. Jung believed that empaths who complete this journey serve a crucial evolutionary function in human consciousness. By demonstrating that it's possible to feel everything without being overwhelmed, to love deeply without losing yourself, to remain open without being destroyed, you're modeling a way of being that humanity desperately needs. In a world that oscillates between numbing out completely and being overwhelmed by everything, you represent the middle path, the integration of sensitivity and sovereignty that allows genuine healing to occur. If you've stayed with me through this entire exploration, I want to honor something in you. You've been courageous enough to look at your empathic nature, not as something to fix or suppress, but as something to understand and integrate. That willingness to do this deep work is what Jung called the mark of an individuated soul, someone committed to becoming whole rather than remaining comfortable. And if you feel called to continue this work, To deepen your understanding of how to transform your empathy into sustainable gift, I want to remind you one final time about the resource I've created specifically for this journey. The Shadow Protocol is a 30-day Jungian guide designed to help you break free from patterns of impossible love and reclaim your sovereign sensitivity. It's in the first pinned comment, waiting for you whenever you're ready to take the next step in your transformation. I'd be deeply honored if you'd share in the comments what shifted for you during this exploration, what you recognized in yourself, what you're ready to release or embrace. Your story might be exactly what another empath needs to hear to keep going, to trust their process, to believe that transformation is possible. And if this has helped you see your empathic nature through a new lens, if you feel less alone in your experience, I'd love for you to subscribe so we can continue this journey together, exploring the depths of what it means to be human, to feel deeply, to transform pain into wisdom. Share this with another empath who might need to hear that their sensitivity isn't their flaw, that their capacity to feel everything is preparing them for something extraordinary, that passing the final test isn't about becoming less empathic, but about becoming sovereign in their empathy. Thank you for trusting me with this time, for having the courage to feel deeply in a world that often demands numbness, for being willing to do the hard work of becoming whole. Your empathic heart isn't broken. It's breaking open into its fullest, most powerful expression. Until we meet again in the next exploration of the human soul's journey toward integration and wholeness.